Hi, my name is David Ferrell. We're here at Dockside Studios, and we're going to set up for a band here tonight that's going to be here. There's going to be a quartet, four-piece band with a singer. This is my friend Elizabeth, and we're going to be talking about how this is all set up, and we're starting from the very beginning. So this is the drum set that we use here at Dockside. This is a pretty traditional setup of a four-piece setup with a tom, a floor tom, bass drum, snare, and a few cymbals. I'm assuming that our drummer is going to be right-handed, so it's set up for a right-handed configuration. But at this point, we want to kind of pick out which mics we want to put on all the drums. There's various miking techniques you can use for drum sets. Some people like to use minimalist miking, where they'll just use maybe a bass drum mic and two overheads, and that'll be the whole balance for the whole set. The other rule of thumb is put a microphone everywhere so you can capture all those individual things so you can balance those things later on. The good thing about the minimalist miking is you have less phase cancellation when you use fewer capsules and less distortion. However, you're really counting on the drummer being good and playing balanced, because you won't be able to change the proportion of things later on. You're pretty much counting on him giving you the balance that you need. So by putting several microphones up, you're kind of covering yourself so you can adjust for those balances later on. So the first thing we're going to do is we start up the drum set by starting with a bass drum. I've got a particular microphone I like to use, but there is probably 3 or 4 really good mics out there for bass drum. My personal preference is this AKG D112. And this microphone can be used a couple different ways. Sometimes on this particular drum, they have a hole cut in the center. Sometimes there's no hole cut. Sometimes there's no head at all on the front of the drum.
David, sometimes I see people using blankets on the kick drum. What does that accomplish, and do you ever use that technique? I
do. It kind of depends on the drummer and the style of music we're doing, but the blanket over the kick drum accomplishes 2 things. Sometimes it helps contain the sound so that the bass drum microphone is more isolated from the other things, so that way the cymbals aren't leaking into the bass drum mic. But it also, when you set up out here in the room, I'm going to set up some room microphones to pick up the sound of the drum as well. And sometimes when you get multiple low-frequency images, especially from a room versus here, they get a little, the bass sounds get a little cluttered. So by putting the blanket over it, you're not only containing the sound to the microphone, but you're also keeping the sound from escaping as much to the room mics. So it attenuates the bass drum sound in the room mics. So you just kind of go with the flow and figure out what kind of drum you got will depend on how you want to mic it. One method is just putting the microphone right outside the bass drum hole, so where the sound's coming out, it'll pick it up. Or another method is to actually slip the microphone up inside the drum. And I personally like to kind of put the microphone around the center of the shell, facing the head. But however, this is all experimental. And I recommend that once you get your microphone in place, you have your drummer play the drum and listen to the sound. And if you don't like it, move the microphone around. Move it forward, move it backward, move it to the side, because every position inside this drum is going to give you a different sound. So you have to just kind of look for the sound you're looking for. And it's all personal taste, so one person's good bass drum sound might be different from another person. So you just have to experiment with it. But as a starting point, I think inside the drum about midway is a nice starting point. Okay, now we're going to set up the second sound source for the kick drum, and I like to use this Yamaha NS10 as a sub-kick. A speaker is really just the opposite of a microphone. They can put out sound, but it also can receive sound. So you place this speaker in front of the bass drum. Of course, you want to make sure it's not touching the bass drum so it doesn't vibrate when the player is playing the thing. And the way this works, you just come out of the output of the speaker terminals to a direct box, an instrument direct box. So the next thing we're going to do is the snare drum. I like to use two microphones. This is my favorite microphone to use, which is the SM57 made by Shure. And I put this on top. And then I also have a second microphone called an AKG 414. This is a condenser microphone and much more expensive, but it has a nice high-end frequency response, and that's why I like it on the bottom of the drum. And I'm going to place it below the drum so it's actually catching the snares that's on the bottom of the drum. How would you mic a snare drum, Elizabeth?
Generally, similarly, a 57 on top with a 414 on the bottom. I was wondering if you use a roll-off at all on the 414 on the bottom.
I don't because most of the energy down below the snare drum is really high frequency based, and the reason for using the bottom microphone is because it adds high end to the sound of the snare drum without having to use equalization. If you only use the microphone on the top, and they want the snare drum to have a lot of crack to it or a lot of attack to the sound, the only way to sometimes get that, if you don't have a drum that's acoustically giving you that sound, is to add equalization. But whenever you add EQ to a mic up here, things like the hi-hat and this cymbal here is going to bleed into that mic. So if you add too much high frequencies via EQ to that microphone, they'll end up being cymbal microphones as well. So I use the combination, that way I can get some of the high-end sound from the snare drum from the bottom, and that microphone is even further away from the cymbals than that, so I get more control over the sound of the drum. And it gives me two sound sources when I'm mixing, so I can choose whether I want to favor the top mic, the bottom mic, maybe put effects on the bottom mic and not the top mic, or vice versa. It just gives me lots of different choices, lots of options.
What's the best way to place the microphones to avoid any phasing issues?
Well, anytime you have two diaphragms pointing to each other, you're going to have phase cancellation. So whenever you're doing this, you're almost always going to have to flip the phase of the bottom microphone to make sure it's in phase with the top microphone. And you really just have to listen to it, because how you position the microphones will have an effect on how much phase cancellation you're getting. The more the diaphragms are pointing at each other, the more out of phase they are. And when you have variations of that, it changes slightly. So basically you have to just listen, use your ears to know whether the sound of the microphone in phase is canceling the sound, or do you need to flip the phase of the bottom microphone to make the sound larger than what you would normally get. But I like to use two microphones for two reasons. There's a lot of high energy that comes from the bottom of the snare, and sometimes if you only use a top mic, but the snare drum needs more high end added to it, our tool to get more high end is equalization. But if you add too much EQ to that top snare drum mic, the hi-hat sound's going to start leaking into it, the cymbal sound's going to start leaking into it, so the snare drum mic ends up being a cymbal mic as well as a snare drum mic. The bottom mic adds high end by itself, so when you add those two things together, you get a brighter snare drum sound without having to add equalization, and that keeps better control or better balance of the overall sound. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is a hi-hat. So I've got a microphone right here. This microphone is a Shure SM81. It's a condenser microphone. Whenever I'm miking cymbals, which have a very high frequency response to them, I like to use condenser mics because they can capture the high frequencies much better than a dynamic mic can with a more accurate clarity. So I'll always use a condenser mic of some sort on the hi-hat.
And is there any reason you prefer the SM81 to a 451 or other hi-hat microphone?
Well, there are several microphones that are fine hi-hat mics, and certainly you can get a good hi-hat mic sound on a variety of microphones. One of the nice things about the SM81, it has two features. It's got a 10 dB pad built into it, so that way if the cymbal's too loud, you can pad down the mic so you're not overloading the preamp inside here. And it does have a roll-off in case you get kind of a woofy sound from the hi-hats, which sometimes when the cymbals come together, the wind can kind of create a big rumble on the bottom end. So having that high-pass filter on here also helps to filter some of that out. Now you can do it a couple different ways. You can actually, physically move the microphone to another position to try to get rid of some of that low frequency stuff. But if the mic's picking up a good sound and the only problem you have is that low frequency bump that's going on, that high pass filter is a very handy tool to have. So I like this mic just because it gives a good sound and has the features that I need to meet most hi-hat needs.
Would you choose a different mic if the drummer had a set of larger hi-hats?
Possibly so. The larger hi-hats will be darker sounding, so I would want to make sure that I had a microphone that's bright enough, that's still going to give me an edgy sound without it sounding too brittle. Whereas a smaller set of hi-hats like this are already kind of bright anyway, so it's a little easier kind of to use the smaller hi-hats. But you just got to pick and choose. Like I said, there's no right way or no wrong way of doing this. So you put up a microphone, listen to it. If it's not giving you the sound you want, you pick another microphone.
Would you place the microphone differently depending on the genre of music?
Sometimes I would. If you got a guy who's using the pedal with his foot and the cymbal is doing a lot of opening and closing, then it's kind of important that the microphone be out so it's capturing the sound of that cymbal closing. Now some drummers, they might spend most of their time hitting the top of the cymbal, or maybe even just having it partially open so they're kind of waffling back and forth. On a drummer like that, I would probably put the microphone over the top of this cymbal a little bit more, but never too close. If you get the microphone way close on the mic on the cymbal, then you're really only hearing that little part of the cymbal. But the cymbal makes a bigger sound than that, so to capture the bigger sound, you need to be back a little bit from the instrument. Now, if you go too far back, then it becomes just kind of a general mic for everything. So you want it close enough that when you solo this mic up, you're going to hear a hi-hat primarily out of this sound. But certainly, variation of whether you have the hi-hat mic here or here will give you a totally different sound. And so you have to use your judgment on what sounds good for this record. And it's got to be your choice as well as the drummer's choice, because you're trying to make the drummer happy too. And he has an idea in his head of how he'd like the sound to go. So you might try some different variations and let him choose which sounds better to you. This is just another of the same kind of microphone, another KM84. And I would position it approximately like I have the other ones, around 18 inches or so above the cymbal. Now, like I said before, in this position, I'm primarily focusing the microphones to pick up the cymbal sound and not necessarily a stereo image of the drum set. But those are sort of the two rules of thought of when you're setting this up. You can do it either way, and neither way is necessarily better or worse than the other. It's just different. So you just have to experiment with it. So, like I said, this is kind of how you set it up if you're micing cymbals only. If you're going to do a stereo configuration, then the center focus point of a drum set is the snare drum and the kick drum. A lot of times in the mix, the snare drum and kick drum will be in the center of your mix. So when you're positioning the microphones, you might want to put them, just move this for a moment. Basically what you're trying to do, if you're trying to get a stereo image of all this, is you want these microphones to be picking up kind of the same information. So they need to be the same height off the floor. But another good thing to do is to take a string or a chord or something and measure the distance between the center of this drum and this capsule, and the center of this drum and this capsule. Because if you get them an equal distance apart, then the sound will be arriving about the same time. So that way, these two microphones are picking up a good center image of the snare drum. And then, of course, this tom-tom's going to sound more to the right because this microphone's going to pick this up more. This cymbal will sound more to the left because it's closer to that side, but the snare drum will sound centered. So that's another good technique, but you got to be pretty precise in getting your measurements right. I mean, I just have them kind of generalized here, but this is a good method of doing it.
Do you ever use techniques like XY or RTF for overheads?
I do. And they all are these are stereo miking techniques that you can try, and they all give you different results. It kind of depends, again, on your drummer, on how he plays, on which technique kind of works. And so a lot of times you'll just have to experiment with this and listen to it and say, yes, that works. No, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. You know, sometimes I'll put these mics out on the cymbals. Sometimes I'll put them here. Sometimes I'll put the microphones over the drummer's head. So, because the drummer is hearing it this way, so he plays balanced to his ears. So it's a good thing to have the diaphragms close to what the drummer's hearing, and sometimes that will give you a good balance. But again, it's all subject to opinion, and it's all trial and error. So it takes time to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And you just have to use your own judgment in which method gives you the best results.
Is there a situation in which you would mic the overheads a bit farther from the cymbals?
If I have a drummer who plays really loud and the cymbals are doing this all the time, I would probably move the mics a little further away for two reasons. So you don't get the proximity effect as much of the cymbal getting closer to the mic and further away from the mic as that goes. And it kind of gives you a better overall cymbal blend when you back them up like that, instead of having an individual cymbal coming out specifically on a given microphone.
Great, thanks so much.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is the bass guitar. Now, with a bass guitar player, he's playing electric bass. So I like to use two sources for the bass guitar. First of all, I'll plug the bass guitar directly into a instrument direct box, so that way I can get the sound straight off his bass, straight to the console. And then he's also going to play through this bass guitar amplifier. And bass guitar amplifiers are similar to electric guitar amplifiers in that you're going to mic the speaker, relatively close. With a bass sound, you probably don't want as much ambience because bass sounds are pretty directional and kind of in your face. So I would probably not use a distant mic on an amp, but doesn't mean you can't, because it depends on the genre of music. Maybe that would be a good thing to do. But in general, I would take a direct box on the bass, as well as a high-quality microphone on the bass amplifier itself. Again, I'm using a 414 because it has a nice wide range frequency response. But Electro Voice RE20s are excellent microphones, which is about a $400 mic. I think this microphone may be in that $1,000 price range for the 414, but 421, $300 microphone sounds good on the bass guitar as well. And print both versions, and that way you can choose to either favor one or the other, or an equal combination when you go to mix the song. Because you won't know until you record the song what the bass sound really should be or could be. So by having variations of the sound gives you more flexibility.
Great. I've noticed you chose a condenser mic for this. Mm-hmm. What are the benefits for choosing a condenser? Is it the wide frequency response? Primarily.
I think the 414 has a nice bottom to it, and I use that 414 on a lot of different instruments because it has such a nice full range to it. But you've got to be careful with a condenser mic of not overloading them again. So you just have to make sure you use the pads or things like that. But my first choice would probably be a dynamic mic most of the time. The Electro Voice RE20 is my favorite mic to put in that position. But since it's not here today, the 414 is going to work just fine. Okay, now we're going to talk about miking a guitar amplifier. This is kind of a typical guitar amplifier. This particular amplifier has 4 speakers in it, so you have to kind of guess about where those speakers are in the front and then mic the instrument accordingly. So I have a few different microphones I like to use on this instrument right here. My first choice, again, my trusty SM57, which is about a $100 microphone. Very affordable, but probably one of the best microphones you can have in your arsenal, because it does a lot of good sounds on a lot of different things. The other microphone I like to use on guitar is this AKG 414. But like I said on the drums, you know, there's lots of microphones that sound good on guitar. Actually, the 421 that we use on the tom-tom sounds good on guitars. This sounds good on guitars. U87 sound good on guitars. I'm sure there's some more, but I'm not thinking of them right this moment. But again, this is a condenser mic, so it's because these amplifiers sometimes get loud, you'll want to use the pad that's on the back. And then I like to place them down where both diaphragms are an equal distance from the speaker. Now, some people like to put one microphone on this speaker and maybe the other microphone on this speaker. Doesn't make a whole lot of difference unless there's a discernible difference in the speakers themselves. But if they're all equal, they should be putting out about the same sound. So to me, the most important thing is to have the diaphragms close, because if you have one microphone with the diaphragm, even if it's just a few inches back from the other one, you have a time arrival problem. So the time the sound is arriving at the two capsules at 2 different times, and that can cause some phase cancellation or distortion or kind of ugly coloration. So I get the best results if I make sure that both diaphragms are equal distance from the sound source. And then I also use a third microphone because when people listen to a guitar amplifier, very rarely do they stick their head down in front of it and hear that sound. They're usually standing back a few feet from the amplifier, so they hear what we call more ambient sound, or more room sound. So you need a room microphone to pick up that sound. And so I have another microphone I'd like to use. This is another condenser, but a wide variety of microphones will work in this position as well. But I would get back from the amplifier anywhere from 8 feet to 15 feet. And the further you get away, the more distant the amplifier will sound, or more roomy the sound will be. But you kind of just set that based upon what you think the needs are for the record. If you're doing a record where they want a really upfront close sound, then you're probably going to favor those microphones that are up close to the speaker. If you're doing rock and roll records, they like the sound of the guitars a little more ambient, so you might end up dialing more of this microphone into the mix. But I end up using a blend of the 3 or 2 or some combination thereof. So if you were going to mic a guitar, do you have any other mics that you like to use or techniques?
Generally, we use very similar setup, but sometimes we also use a Royer 121. I was wondering if you ever use ribbon microphones.
I do. The ribbon microphones are really good on electric guitars. I like them on brass instruments. But you got to kind of remember that a ribbon microphone can only handle so much volume. The Royer is one of the ribbon mics that can handle a lot of volume. But most of the traditional ribbon microphones were built for vocals and built for miking an orchestra at a at a reasonable distance. So you just have to be careful with the ribbons not to overload them, because you can distort them very, very easily. And the other thing to keep in mind, a ribbon microphone is figure 8, which means it picks up in the front, also picks up in behind. So if you want the sound to be really up front in your face, a ribbon microphone won't give you that sound because it's picking up sound from behind the microphone. So it's giving you a combination of those two sounds, which is why they sound good on horns and things like that, because most of the time horns sound better when you're back off from the horn a little bit. So having some of that sound dialed in from the back of the microphone helps the instrument sound more ambient. Now this miking technique is great for the studio because, basically we're focusing on just getting the sound for that amplifier. We can't use these same techniques for live, because when you're in a live situation, you've got a PA system, you've got floor monitors that are sending sound back to the individuals. So you have to use different miking techniques and even sometimes different microphones for live application versus studio application.
Would you change your miking technique based on the type of amp or genre of music?
Not necessarily on the type of amp, maybe on the genre of music. Putting the microphones only a few inches from the speaker is one way of doing it, but you can certainly get a good sound from an amplifier if you take these microphones and back them up. So now that the microphones are getting kind of a collection of all 4 speakers. But this will make the sound a little more distant, not too much, but it won't sound as upfront as it would if the microphones were only a few inches from the cone. So you gotta kind of just play it by ear. I mean, it's all very subjective. There's no right and wrong that, if you do it this way it's right and you do it this way it's wrong. You have to use your own ear and your own judgment to decide, yes, this is getting me a better guitar sound, or no, it's not getting me a better guitar sound, and what do I need to do to make it more like what I would like it to be.
Do you generally mic the amp closer for rock music?
Not necessarily, but that's why I use multiple microphones. Certainly it's not unusual. I've got 3 set up here, but it's certainly not unusual to use 4, 5, 6 microphones, and that way, if you have a microphone here, and then you have another microphone here, you can choose when you're mixing which microphone should be the favored microphone of the group. All of them will give you different results. So I would rather print as many versions that I can, so that way I can have more choices when I'm going to mix. I can say, okay, for this song, the guitar should sound a little more back or a little more subdued in the mix, so I might want to favor this microphone. Whereas this other sound, it's the rhythm sound, it's the upfront, in your face kind of sound, so now I might want to favor that microphone up close. And if the guy's playing a guitar solo, which they like to use a lot of effects or more room sound, I might use more of a combination of the room mic and that front mic, or the room mic and this mic, and create more ambience for that electric guitar solo. Okay, well, the next thing we're going to talk about is the saxophone. We have a saxophone in this band, and this is our saxophone player, so he's going to show us how he's going to hold the instrument. The main thing with acoustic instrument is you really need to listen to the instrument, let the man play the sound, and kind of walk around the instrument and kind of listen to where all the sounds are coming from. On this horn, most of the sound comes out of the bell, but a certain amount of sound comes out of these keys on the side. So this is my main microphone I like to use in front of the saxophone. And would you hold the saxophone like you're going to play it? And I would mic this instrument not too close, because you want to get the overall sound of the horn. If you get the diaphragm right up in the horn, then all you're really getting is the sound that's coming out of here. So you want to be back just enough where it's capturing a combination of the sound coming out of here and the sound coming out of this part of the instrument as well. Now, everybody has a different sound. Some guys have bright sounds, some guys have dark sounds. and there's everything in between. So your choice of microphones will kind of depend on the player itself. I would say the rule of thumb is get the best microphone you got in the building and start there. Doesn't mean that's going to be the best microphone for him, but that's a good place to start. I like this particular microphone. This is a Telefunken blue microphone reproduction of the Telefunken U47. It's a tube mic, so it has a nice rich sound to it. It has a large diaphragm, so it gives you a full-bodied sound. And I usually use it in a cardioid position, which means it's picking up primarily in front. Now, I could use it in a figure 8 position, kind of like a ribbon mic, where it's picking up from behind as well, but I really make that call after I hear the man play and see what kind of a sound I'm getting in that position. If I don't like the cardioid, switch it to Omni, listen to that. Switch it to figure 8, listen to that. And then try to figure out which sound sounds the best for this particular gentleman's tone, because every saxophone is different. And even a different man playing this same horn would give you a different tone. So you can't just say, okay, it's a saxophone, I know it's going to sound like this, because that's not going to be the case. Also, I'll usually like to use 2 microphones on a saxophone. I'll have one in front like this, and then I also have usually use another condenser mic. It could be the same, it could be a different mic. This is a 414, and sometimes I'll put it on the side so that when the man's playing, the sound that's coming out of the side of this instrument is getting picked up. So this will give me a little bit more bottom to the sound, and sometimes I'll use a combination of the two. Sometimes I might only use that one, or might only use this one. It really kind of just depends on what I'm going for and the kind of song it is. If it's a ballad, I might want a warmer tone, whereas if it's an up-tempo, lively thing, I might want a little brighter tone. So those things kind of determine which microphone might be the best for this instrument.
And why have you chosen a condenser for your secondary microphone?
Well, this instrument has got a nice full range. It's got lots of highs and lots of a body on the bottom. So I find that the condenser microphones will give me that full range sound, whereas the dynamic microphones are kind of limited in their frequency response. So not saying you can't use the dynamic mic, and if you only have a dynamic mic to choose from, then certainly put it up and just find the position on that instrument that gives us the microphone the best sound. But in most cases, the condenser microphones will sound the best on acoustic instruments.
Like the guitar amp, we're interested in isolation here. Where would be the best place to put the saxophone player?
Right. Again, we're going to record everybody at the same time, so everybody has to be isolated. He's out in this room for this demonstration, so we can show you how to mic the instrument. But when we actually record this instrument, he's going to be behind this glass door in this, this large area, because I think horns need a larger space to for their sound to expand. If you put an instrument like this in a small closed-in space, you get kind of a boxy closet sound. Whereas this instrument really is made to be played in concert halls and large rooms. So they sound better when they're in a larger room. So I'm going to pick the largest room I have available. Of course, this is the largest room, but my drum set's already taken this space. So he gets the next largest space, which is this area out here, because it has nice high ceilings. There's all kinds of angles out there, so the sound's going to dissipate in a lot of different directions. And I think I'll just get a more natural sound out of the horn in a larger space.
Is recording saxophone similar to vocals in that the saxophone player should experiment with different microphones so he knows what sounds best with his instrument? Absolutely,
absolutely, because his sound is probably not going to change that much from day to day. So once he finds a microphone that sounds good for him, he should make note of what kind of microphone that is. So that way when he goes to another studio, he can say, hey, I've used this particular microphone before and got a very good result. They may have that microphone, they may not. But if you know what kind of microphone works good for you, you'll have a better chance of getting a good sound when you go to the studio, especially if they have that microphone available. And just like the vocalists, they should experiment. Like I kind of give you a proximity of how it should be done, but he needs to move in on the mic and move away from the mic and listen to his sound to see if what he's getting, because he might want a sharp, bright tone all the time, because that's what he wants. And you could probably get that by getting kind of close up on the mic. But I don't know personally what he wants in his head, so he has to kind of do some experimenting, just like I do some experimenting, so we come up with a good sound for this particular player. Neumann U87, which is probably about a $3,000 microphone. It's a very good mic for vocals, also a very good mic for a lot of other things. Pretty much any acoustic instrument, pianos, violins, guitars. This makes an excellent microphone. And I've also got a windscreen set up so that if the singer says any words that has the letter P in it, it won't pop the mic, because a certain amount of air comes out of the vocalist when they do this. So you need a windscreen in front just to stop the air from hitting the diaphragm. So otherwise you get kind of this explosion sound that comes through the microphones whenever they put out extra air like that. And this particular microphone has a shock mount, because when you're micing a vocalist, depending on the singer, some people sing very loud, but some people have softer voices. So this microphone is going to be cranked up pretty loud. So you don't want any bumping of the microphone to be transmitted through the microphone itself. So this isolation mount keeps the microphone suspended. So even if you touch the stand, the sound's not going straight to the mic. It's being isolated from the stand. And that's the primary reason you use shock mounts.
How far away generally would you place the vocalist from the microphone?
Well, every singer has their own range. You know, if they have a big voice that sings nice and loud and can fill a room, then these people can be as far as 18 inches back from the mic and still get a nice full sound. I remember working with Elvis Costello. He liked to be just like this. He would be right up on the diaphragm. And that's what he liked. That was the sound he liked. So there's not really a set rule saying, okay, it has to be 3 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches. Every singer has to listen to themselves through this microphone, and they need to try this, move in, move back, and listen and see which sound sounds good to them. And so there's, like I said, no right or wrong way of doing it. Everybody has a different technique.
And should an individual singer try that technique with multiple microphones?
Absolutely, because every microphone sounds different, will enhance different frequencies, and everybody's voices are different. Some people have deep, dark voices. Some people have high, shrill voices. So there is no one microphone that will sound good on everybody, although there's a couple really good ones that sound good on most people. But I would definitely recommend for any singer to go into the studio, if they have 3 or 4 or 5 microphones to choose from that are all good options as vocal microphones, sing into every one of them. See which one makes their voice sound the best to them, and that's the mic you should probably use. Okay, well, the next thing we're going to do is mic a piano. And miking a piano can be a little difficult sometimes. You know, pretty much piano sounds are kind of subjective. You can probably get 10 piano players and you'll get 10 different opinions about the way the piano should sound. But there's some different techniques for miking a piano. This is one of my favorite techniques, especially with a large piano like this. This is a 9-foot piano. So if you stand over in this area, you usually hear a nice big full sound from the piano. So that's logically a pretty good place to put mics. If it sounds good there, chances are the mics are going to sound good there. Again, kind of like that saxophone, use the best microphones you have available. Over here we have a pair of the blue Telefunken 47s, which are really good mics, but any good stereo pair of condenser mics will probably get a pretty good sound, just slightly different versions. So this technique here can be a couple different things. This is my first choice is use the MS recording technique, where whereas this capsule here is going to be cardioid facing the piano. This capsule up here is in figure 8, so it's picking up sound this way. So when you add these two together and you copy I'd have to go into the technique of MS miking, but basically the figure 8 mic is copied to another channel, then you flip that channel out of phase. So when this microphone is actually panned directly to the center, it disappears 100%. But when you dial in this sound, when you have when you have this microphone, the figure 8 mics pan hard left and hard right, it really sounds weird all by itself. But when you dial in this center mic, all of a sudden it gives you this beautiful stereo image of the piano. So this is one of my favorite miking techniques is using MS recording. Another technique is a bloom line, which means you put both microphones in figure 8, and then you position the diaphragms so they're crisscrossed and picking up a pickup pattern that way. You can put them in cardioid, and then say place a microphone here and place another microphone here to get kind of a stereo image of the piano. Every one of these techniques will give you a different sound. All of them are good. You have to just be the one to decide which one sounds best for this piano and for the style of music you're about to do. If it's going to be a piano record where the piano is the featured thing, I would spend lots of time making sure you get the best piano sound you can. If the piano is just going to be an accompaniment instrument, and with guitars and drums and horns and violins and vocals and all those other things, then the sound of the piano isn't as critical because it's just one of several things. Whereas in a jazz trio, for example, if you got just upright bass, piano, and drums, the piano is really going to be a featured thing. So you got to make sure you get the best and fullest sound that you can on the piano. Another thing I like to do on pianos is sometimes use a third mic. And I'll put that microphone, which I like to use an Omni microphone, and I'll put it more towards the back of the piano so that I kind of capture the length or the depth of this piano. Now, usually when I'm using a mic back here, I'll take these microphones and these will be closer up front here. So let me give you another demonstration of a miking technique. Another technique I think sounds really good on pianos is just getting the microphones up over the capsule, over the strings. Get these mics in the ballpark. I don't know if I can really get them in the exact position I want them with these particular stands, but basically something to this effect, where you have both microphones up over the hammers of the piano. You know, depending on the piano sound you're looking for. If you're wanting a sound that's pretty kind of up front and in your face, the microphones up closer to the hammers will give you that sound. If you want the piano to sound more ambient or more concert-like, then backing the mics away from the piano will give you more of that ambient and full sound.
So would you change your mic placement based on the genre of music? For example, if you were making a classical recording, would you move the microphones back?
Absolutely.
Versus a pop recording where you would mic more closely?
Absolutely. If I'm doing a concert thing where I want to make it sound like this piano is sitting in a concert hall, well, people are never up on the stage next to the piano, they're back. So they're accustomed to hearing the piano in a more ambient fashion and not so up front. So having the microphones back in this position or even back in, you know, further away, 5 feet, 10 feet away, will capture a good sound. Now, if this instrument is being recorded with other instruments at the same time, you have to think about your mic placement, because you don't want these microphones just to become microphones for everything. There still need to be piano microphones. So you've got to kind of just govern how far away from the microphone, how far away from the piano you want them to be, based upon how much isolation you need on that piano sound and the type of piano sound you're trying to get. Okay, this is the last thing we're hooking up today. This keyboard player uses electronic keyboard because he gets a variety of sounds. Some are electric key sounds, probably some might be horn kind of sounds you don't know. But basically, with an electronic keyboard like this, it's going to have a direct output. So this has high impedance, which means it's a 1/4 inch cord, and so it will require to go to a direct box. So we'll come out of the keyboard into the direct box, and this goes into our console. Now, some keyboards have a balanced output, which is an XLR connector. And if they have a balanced output, then you can bypass the direct box because it means it's given it +4 and can go straight to the console.
With respect to the direct boxes, when you're choosing a direct box for the keyboard, is there anything you should keep in mind?
Well, you should always use a high-quality direct box. It doesn't matter whether it's a keyboard, a bass guitar, electric guitar. The better the quality of the direct box, the fuller the sound, the least amount of noise it's going to produce. So always try to choose as good as direct box as you can afford.
And what is the biggest problem you can run into with regard to mischoosing your gear and impedance matching?
Well, like I was saying, if you send 14 dB more signal to a preamp than it's supposed to get, what happens is you'll overload that preamplifier, you'll cause some distortion, maybe some fuzziness in the sound, and you won't get as clear of sound as it should be. So it's always important to make sure that your impedances match on both ends, so that way the equipment is operating efficiently.
And what is the best way to make sure you don't run into this problem and that your impedances do match?
Well, it's just a matter of trying not to, if you got an XLR output on this, don't think that you can just turn that into a 1/4 inch plug just because you have a wire that does that. Just because the wire will plug in doesn't mean you're matching up the output level of this preamp to the input level of the preamp you're going to. So the mistake that most people make is they think, well, as long as I get a wire that goes from point A to point B, it should be fine. Well, that's not always true. You have to use your ear and you have to listen to what it's doing to the sound. If it sounds clear, then go with it. If it doesn't sound clear, then you got to figure out why it's not matching up.
Great. I'd appreciate it if you could talk a little bit about the ground lift on the DI box.
Well, sometimes when you're connected to multiple electrical systems, like this instrument could be plugged into an electrical outlet, but also could be going to a guitar amplifier that might be fed by another electrical outlet. As long as both electrical outlets are on the same ground plane, you shouldn't have a ground issue. But sometimes they're not on the same ground plane, so which means that you're going to get a hum, a 60-cycle hum from that. And sometimes just by lifting the ground, which is like separating that third wire off of an electrical plug that goes into the wall from that outlet, that eliminates that ground hum.
Great, thanks.
All right, well, we got it all hooked up. Let's go see how this sounds.
Great, let's go listen.
Okay, we're going to talk about the patch bay. This is a Neve 8058 console. It has 48 inputs and 48 outputs. And this is kind of where everything in the room, including the outboard effects, compressors, equalizers, tape machines, Pro Tools, everything comes to this point in this room. So you can pretty much patch anything to anything via this patch bay system. So I know the camera can't really get in tell details, so I'll just kind of give you an overview of what's going on here. This top row is called multi-track tape output. So this would be the output of Pro Tools or the output of a 2-inch tape machine if you're using a 2-inch machine. The next row down is console line inputs. So this is a way to get a signal back into the console at line level. This input layer, though, is only available during mixdown. When the console's in tracking mode, it's getting the signal directly from the output of the tape machine or the output of Pro Tools. Because there's 48 inputs, you have two rows. This row is 1 through 24, so this row is 25 through 48. So it's a duplication of the same thing, it's just the other side of the board. And we come down to this row, this is what they call the channel insert sends and returns. So this is an output from a given channel to be able to patch into a compressor or an outboard equalizer or an outboard effects system. So the send is sending signal from the console, from this channel, to a piece of equipment. So I'll just patch something in just to kind of give you an idea. So if we had a microphone coming in on, say, channel 15 on the console, I'd come into channel 15 send output and come into a compressor input right there. And then I'd take the compressor output and bring it back to the 15 return. So I'm basically making a loop and putting the compressor in the loop. So now whatever microphone I have on channel 15 will now also have a compressor on that channel, and that sound will get recorded to the tape machine or recorded to Pro Tools, whichever format you're using. The next row down is just the same thing for channels 25 through 48 again. And then you have the console bus outputs. So each channel on this console has an individual direct output, which is what this button is right here. So if I had a microphone patched into channel 48, and this is the direct assigned, if I wanted that channel to go to, say, input 9 on our recording system, I would come over here and I would patch console bus output 48 right here, and the input to Pro Tools is multi-track tape inputs 1 through 24, and here's number 9. So I'm actually completing a patch from the output of this preamplifier to the input of Pro Tools number 9 or multi-track number 9. So again, the patch bay is just a method to be able to route anything from anywhere in the console to outboard equipment or to the tape machine. And then also in the patch bay, like I said, all this outboard is located. So all these inputs and outputs down here are dedicated to different pieces that we have in the patch bay. And it's all labeled. There's Focusrite devices back here. There's Summit devices back here. There's Pultec EQs back here. And so all these things are located in the patch bay, as well as the effects, the reverbs, the Lex 480, the plates, and things like that. So the way to patch in and out of these things is here. Very few things is hardwired directly to the console, other than the panels in the room where the microphones are plugged in. Those will get hardwired in. And of course the output of the console to the tape machine is hardwired. But everything else is pretty much, you got to patch it if you want it to be there. So of course all the EQs in the console are already readily available. But if I want a compressor or an outboard EQ, I have to come over here and complete a patch to get that to happen. Also over here is the headphone system for the studio. And every studio has a different type of headphone system. We have what's called a private Q system here, which gives us 12 inputs. So we can listen to 12 different sound sources in that box, and each musician has its own mixer, so they can blend those sound sources any way they like. But for example, if we wanted the kick drum, which is going to be in channel 1, find my channel 1 cable. The bass drum is in 1. It's going to go to 1 in Pro Tools. So if I want that channel to go out to the headphone system so the drummer can control the volume of the bass drum in his headphones, I come out of the multi-track output 1 right here, and I come down to the headphone input 1. So by completing this patch, I've now patched the output of Pro Tools, the kick drum, to channel 1 of the private key system. And I basically would be doing this for each and every instrument that's we're going to be recording today. So the snare drum is coming in on channel 3. I'm going to come out of output 3 to channel 2 of the headphones, and et cetera, et cetera. One other thing that I do is I like to give the band a copy of my mix. So that way, even if they don't turn up the individual channels, if they just turn up this one stereo channel on their headphone mixer, they can hear exactly what I'm listening to. So I do that by coming out of the console line out, which is the final output state of the console, and I go to 2 inputs on that headphone system. So by just completing that patch right there, all they have to do is turn up channel stereo 2 on the headphone box, and now they're going to hear everything that I'm hearing with delays, reverbs, just the way I'm hearing it. So that's an easy way to get your session started, is by patching this cable in, and then you're pretty much ready to go. Now, of course, we're doing a whole band today, so I will have individual patches for all the things. So the guitar player will have his own channel in the headphones, the bass player will have his own channel in the headphones, the keyboard player will have his own channel, the saxophone player will have his own channel. And of course you will run out because there's only 12. So the more musicians you have, the more you might have to consolidate things. But basically, I think with this band, I can probably give everybody their own individual channel. So we call it the More Me box. I want more me in the headphones. So they can go to that knob and turn up themselves, and they can be louder in their own headphones, and it doesn't affect anybody else, because the other guys might not want to hear them any louder. But everybody wants to hear their own personal instrument louder, just so they make sure they're playing good and they're playing in tune and in time. So these multi-output headphone boxes have really become handy in the studio. When I first started doing this, 30 years ago, most studios were lucky to have 2 headphone mixes. And if you got 7 guys out there, that means you got to figure out how to make 7 guys happy with 2 headphone mixes. And you're not going to do it. Somebody's always going to be unhappy about it. So these individual mixer systems that they have for musicians today are a godsend for engineers, because now we don't have to think about what do they need to hear. We can kind of give them what they need or what's available to them, and they can pick and choose how they want to blend the instruments in their own headphones. Because the way they hear it in the headphones has a lot to do with the way they perform. The better they sound in the headphone, the more confident they are, the better they'll play. If they're hearing weird stuff in the headphones, it's not balanced right, or the sound's not right, a lot of times it impedes their psyche, and they don't perform as well as they should. So headphone mixes are very, very important in a recording studio to give the musicians exactly what they need to hear to make it come out good. So do you have some questions about the patch bay?
I think you've covered everything.
Okay. Okay, so now we've got the band set up. We're back in here in the console, looking at the console here. This is a Neve 8058 series consoles, probably made in the early 70s, but it's a great sounding console. It doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles of our digital consoles we have today, but sonically this is one of the best consoles ever built. It's pretty simple, straight ahead console. The very top knob here is our microphone preamplifier, which is probably the most important part of the console because it's the thing that's capturing the sound. Then right below it is a 3-band equalizer for changing the tone. This console is set up pretty simple in that when it was originally built, it was a 16-bus system. So you can, up here at the top, you can see there's 16 switches that would go to a 16-track machine, because that's what they had in the early 70s. This was before 24-track was available. But they also put a direct button on each channel so that instead of going through the busing system, which can be a little noisy, the direct signal is a cleaner signal. And so if you come out direct of channel 13, it's going to input 13 on your 24-track tape machine, or in our case, Pro Tools. So the output of these preamps are hardwired directly to Pro Tools. So you don't have to patch anything, you just have to assign the direct button and it's there. So the most important thing is a clean signal path. So you have preamp level, which is what you adjust to get the microphone level in the ballpark of this level coming to tape. Then we have the fader here, which is the volume that gets recorded to Pro Tools or to the 2-inch machine. So you should normally run this fader level at unity gain, which is around 0. That's its best sounding position. And then you adjust the preamp accordingly. If you have a loud signal coming in, you're probably going to have the preamp turned down. If you have a singer or somebody that's putting out not very much sound, you'll bring the preamp up. So you make most of your volume compensations by the preamp and not by the fader. But once you get the preamp in the ballpark, then you could slightly adjust the fader up and down to compensate for the musician. If he gets playing a little louder, a little softer, you can kind of chase his level with the fader. But in general, you got to get that preamp set so it's its optimum working level.
Now, what are the benefits of having your preamp hardwired rather than patching it?
Less noise. Anytime you have to go through a patch bay, you're running the risk of another connection. And every time you have a connection, you have the risk of oxidation, especially down here in the south where we have so much humidity. So the fewer patches you can make, the cleaner the signal is going to be. So having the board hardwired straight there with XLR connectors, we're eliminating most of the noise factors. Not saying it will never happen, but you've eliminated most of the things that could give you a problem. And then as we go down the channel strip, we get to these 8 small knobs. These are auxiliary outputs. So each channel has 8 auxiliary outputs to send to outboard equipment. Now some studios, if they don't have a private cue system like we have here, would also use these auxiliary outputs for headphone sends for the musicians. Since we have the private cue, we don't have to do that with the studio. So these aux sends can be dedicated to outboard effects. Then the next thing in the chain is the pan pot, and this the British do things kind of upside down. So instead of your pan pot being left and right, when the knob is pointing down, it's center, and when you turn it this way, it's to the right, and when you turn it this way, it's to the left. So it's basically the same thing as what we have here in the United States, but they just kind of did it different. But this is our pan pot for having the music panning from left to right, or positioning the instrument in the stereo mix. And then the next knob down is our level to tape from the fader, but if we want to kind of adjust the mix as we're listening to it, if we feel like the singer's not loud enough, we can go to this monitor knob and turn it up, and his vocal will get louder, so that way the recording stays consistent, and we're just adjusting how we're hearing it. So that's the primary. Every one of these channels on the console are the same way. So once you learn what the functionality of one module is, you know how all of them work. It looks complicated, but it's not really that intricate. So the next thing we're going to do is get some drum sounds. And we're going to have our drummer come in here to do that for us, of course. And it's always good to use the drummer that's going to be playing on the session, because every drummer kind of plays differently. So if you have a drummer come out and get sounds on the drum set that plays 25% softer than the real drummer that's going to play, you might get your sounds and set your levels based upon your warm-up drummer. And then when your real drummer shows up, all your settings go right out the window, because he plays differently than the other guy. Even though it's the same drum set, same microphones, they all have a different tone that they bring. So it's always good to use the guy that's going to do it, or at least a guy that can play very similar to the guy that's going to do it, if it's going to have to be a replacement.
With respect to the drummer, should you encourage the drummer to play the song that you're going to be recording while you're getting sounds?
I think that's a very good idea, absolutely, because if he's playing an up-tempo smash record or smash song, then he's going to be playing hard and fast, and that's going to be a totally different sound than if he's going to play a ballad. So absolutely, if you have an idea that it's going to be a different kind of thing, you should definitely ask him to play like he's going to play it, and ask him to play at performance level. So not just kind of beating on the drums just to hear them, but play them just like he's going to be playing them on that song. And that will give us a better idea of how to set the sounds and what we're going to get from him when he actually starts playing the song. All hollows out, so it's obvious that there's a problem with the two sources. By just flipping the phase on the subkick, there's your big sound back again. So you got to make sure your microphones are all in phase when you're recording. It's not necessarily wrong to record things out of phase, because sometimes out of phase settings give you interesting results. So I won't say you should never do it, but at least you should know if you're recording things in and out of phase. So the next thing we're going to do is go to the snare drum. Okay, could you give us some quarter notes on the snare drum, please? So that's the top snare drum mic. There's the setting flat. There's the setting with some EQ. Make it sound better with that. So I'm just, for the ease of what we're doing here today, I'm going to go to the equalizer. Now I find with most kick drums, there's some frequencies in the kind of lower mid-range that you can kind of scoop out, and it gives the bass drum kind of more impact. So I don't know if you can hear the difference between this but that's flat, and that's with a little EQ. So I'm not doing a whole lot to it. I'm adding a little bit of high into it for attack, and I'm taking a little bit of that low mid out just to give it a little more body. And then there's a second bass drum source, which is the subkick. And when I bring that in, you can kind of hear how it really fills out the overall bottom. Now I've had to flip the phase on the subkick. If I put the subkick back in phase, all hollows out. So it's obvious that there's a problem with the two sources. By just flipping the phase on the subkick, there's your big sound back again. So you got to make sure your microphones are all in phase when you're recording. It's not necessarily wrong to record things out of phase, because sometimes out of phase settings give you interesting results. So I won't say you should never do it, but at least you should know if you're recording things in and out of phase. So the next thing we're going to do is go to the snare drum. Okay, could you give us some quarter notes on the snare drum, please? So that's the top snare drum mic. There's the setting flat. There's the setting with some EQ. So flat, and then with EQ. So what we're trying to do is make the drums sound good to us, and get them recorded sounding this way. So you can record the drums flat and then try to EQ it after the fact, but I prefer to try to get the sounds as good as you can while you're recording. So that's why I go ahead and put the equalizer in place. I also have a second sound source for the snare drum, the bottom snare mic. And if you listen to this, it sounds pretty bright. There is some low end to it, but you asked about the high pass filter yesterday about it. To me, it really doesn't need any high pass on it, because there's not that much low end information. It's mostly top end. So this is the snare mic on top. That's the snare mic on the bottom. And when you add them together, you get a combination of the two, which gives you more attack on the drum without having to add EQ, because you're getting that high end from the bottom mic. Now that bottom mic, You might have to check the phase, because when you take it out of phase, you hear how hollow the snare drum sounds. Add that, there's the bottom of the snare drum again. So I'm constantly checking phase, make sure things are all in phase. Okay, let me hear your hi-hat, please. So there's the hi-hat flat. And there's the hi-hat with a little bit of EQ. So I like to, personally just brighten up the hi-hat a little bit. Okay, let me hear your first rack tom, please. Well, I'm not crazy about that tom-tom sound, so we might have to go out and move the mic on this one. But we're going to skip over this and go to the next drum. Okay, let me hear the floor tom, please. Now, if you listen to this drum, go ahead, keep playing. You'll hear that it's not tuned very well. It's got to, so regardless of what we do in here, we can't make it sound better if it doesn't sound good out there. So at this point in time, I would stop what I'm doing here and go out and work on the sound source and try to make the source better, because nothing I can do in here is going to make that drum in tune. Right now I'm hearing some weird overtones on the drum. Now I like the overall tone of the drum. It's got body, it's got some depth to it. It's just not tuned very well. So we're going to fix that. All right, let's go to, give me a pattern on the kick, snare, and hi-hat, please. So what I'm going to turn on now is our overheads. And what I'm listening for here is just to see how the overheads are picking up the overall drum set. You can see, you can hear the bass drum in there, but it's not really super loud. And the reason for that is because I put that blanket over the kick drum to subdue the sound. But I am picking up a lot of hi-hat in that overhead on the left. So that might make me want to move that overhead a little further in so it's not as close to the hi-hat sound, because I don't know if I need that plus a hi-hat mic. So that's our basic drum sound, but then I also have some room mics for the drums. Now I have these microphones located about 15 feet away from the drummer. And this is a stereo miking technique that I use. You can hear it it's giving some natural reverb to the drums and making the drums sound like they're in a larger room. And that gives you that up front, close sound. So depending on what the song is, will depend on whether it needs to be this up front, close sound or something more like that. But we won't know until we hear the song. But we print all these sounds so that way we have them and we can adjust them as need be. And that's basically how we get our drum sounds going. Okay, now we're going to get some guitar sounds. So we have our guitar player out here. I'm going to ask him to play for us a little bit. Could you give us some guitar so we can get a sound, please? So I have two microphones on the guitar. I'm using an SM57 by Shure and a AKG 414. Both are positioned the way I showed it on the video yesterday as far as how we mic the amplifier. This is the 57. And here's the 414. 57 again. So you can see the 57's got a little more edge to it, a little more top end, and the 414 is a little rounder sounding on the top end, but it's got a nice full bottom end. And that's why I think these microphones kind of complement each other, because when you add them together, you get the combination of both of those tones to make up one sound. Now you should always check phase. So if we flip the phase on one of the mics, we'll see how the volume went down. So that means it's out of phase. Flip it back in phase, the sound comes back, is nice and full and rich again. So the amplifier's in a small booth. So it doesn't really give you much benefit to have a microphone far back in the back of a booth. You just get kind of a boxy booth sound. So the room mics really only work well when the amplifier can be in a larger space where you can get the microphone far enough to make it far enough to make a difference in the overall tone. But most of the time for rhythm tracks where you're just cutting really clean parts to lay down to give a foundation for the song, the up-close sounds for the amplifier give you a very nice effect. Every now and then we will print a DI, a direct of the guitar as well, just so if we don't like the sound he's getting out of his amplifier, we can always reamp it later. But this guitar player has given me a nice sound out of his guitar amp, so you kind of make that judgment call as you go, whether you need that other sound source or not. If you like the sound sources, then you keep them. You keep this and move on to the next thing. Now he might change it a little bit from song to song, so we'll have to keep kind of adjusting the levels or maybe even adjusting the tone. But as long as you start out with a couple good microphones that give you a nice full sound in general, that's a good starting point. All right, now we're going to listen to the bass sound. So could you give us some sounds from the bass, please? I'm taking two sources from the bass. One's a direct. So that's the sound of this man's bass guitar right out of the bass guitar. I'm not changing anything, I'm not EQing anything. And then he's also running through a bass amplifier. And the amp source is a little darker, but kind of a little richer on the low bottom end. So I like to use both of them together and print both versions, and that way, on whether you want to favor this mic for a rounder sound or this mic for a more poppin' bass sound, or a combination thereof. So it's pretty straight ahead. Now if you've got a bass player that you need to EQ, you can always come up here. You can always come up here to the EQ and try a few things. Try to find the range of the bass that you think you can help with an equalizer. So there's our flat sound. And there's our EQ'd sound. Personally, I like the flat sound. Most of the time, the flat sound will be great. And then you just make sure you get a good clean signal going to your recorder, to your tape recorder, whether it be a 2-inch machine or Pro Tools. Make sure the levels are good and hot, but not too hot, and the sound is clear. And that's how we set up the bass. All right, so now we're going to get a saxophone sound. We have our player out here. I think he's playing already. There he is. So I'm using two microphones on the saxophone again. I'm using one of our best mics at the studio, which is a Telefunken U47.
And is that the one on the bell?
Yeah, this microphone's in front of the horn, in front of the bell, so it's picking up most of the sound. Then I have another microphone on the side that's mostly picking up low frequency information. So you probably couldn't use this mic all by itself, whereas you probably could this mic all by itself. But when you add the two together, and he keeps playing. What you end up with is kind of a fuller sax sound because it gives you some more bottom to the horn, plus gives you the top end. Now, again, this is all subject to change. You know, they might say, oh, we like the brighter sound, so don't use this mic. Or they might say, we like the dark sound, don't use the high mic. But if you print both, you have both options.
Do you generally like to go for a blend of the two?
I'm sorry?
Do you generally like to go for a blend of the two microphones?
I usually go for a blend of the two. I always print both of them, but I go from song to song. Sorry. I usually print both microphones, but I do it on a song-by-song basis on whether I'll need both mics or one mic or change the blend of the two. I really won't know until I hear it in the song, hear what range he's playing in, hear how important the sax part is to the song, to know which combination I'm going to use. But, you know, basically our job here is to capture everything that they're doing, and we'll sort it out later. But we want to capture all the elements we can, because if we don't capture it now, we won't have it to work with later.
Do you ever use a room mic on the sax, or are you picking up a lot of room sound from your secondary side microphone?
I'm picking up some room from this, but with a horn, definitely a room mics are a good idea to have around. You might use them, you might not, but if you don't print them, you won't have them.
Do you ever use room mics on the saxophone, or are you picking up a lot of room sound from your secondary side microphone?
Well, I'm picking up some room from these microphones, especially since he's in a larger room already. A certain amount of room is going to come into the microphones even without a room mic in place, especially if you don't put the microphone too close to the instrument. I think we have the microphone back about maybe 12 inches from the bell at this point, so it is getting a little bit of room sound. But with horns, you know, saxophones, trumpets, trombones, it's a good idea to print a room mic if you can. You might not use it, but if you don't print it, you won't have it. And sometimes that room mic kind of is nice for solos, or just nice for a change in timbre from one song to the other, so you don't have the same exact sax sound on every song. So room mics are a very good thing to print, and it doesn't matter really whether it's a horn or drums or anything. Room mics are always a nice option to have if you have enough mics and you have enough tracks to print the extra channels.
Great. Should we move on to the keys?
Yes. All right, so now we're off to our keyboard. And with our keyboard, we have a direct signal. And I'm taking a stereo because it has to left and right. And again, we're going to just set our preamps so we have a good level to tape. And we'll fine tune it with the faders. Now, this keyboard player likes to play through an amplifier as well. And he just uses one output, so it's mono. Today I'm using a Neumann KM56, I believe, which is like a KM84, but just slightly different. It has multiple patterns, but I've got it in a cardioid mode, so I'm using it like an 84. But that's his amplifier sound, and there's his direct sound. So they sound, you know, different. You know, personally, I kind of like the direct sound more so than that, but this has some character. You know, it has a little grunge to it that he adds. So we're going to do the same thing like we do on the other instruments. We're going to print all the sources, and then we'll decide later on as we're mixing the songs, do we favor the amp sound, do we favor the direct sound? You know, it just gives us more options when we get down to the mix down. And of course, you always want to check phase. Push a button in and the sound gets smaller, it's out of phase.
Do you generally leave your keys pretty flat EQ-wise?
It depends. Whether I EQ a keyboard or not really depends on the keyboard itself. Most of them have really good sounds coming right out of the box, so you don't have to do a lot. But you got to weigh that sound in with everything else too. So an instrument might sound really wonderful by itself, but once you add it to the other things, you might go, well, it's not really cutting through the track. It needs a little more high end, or needs a little more depth, or something else. So you can't judge an instrument just by its initial sound. That's a good starting point, but you might have to tweak these things a little bit as you hear the other things played along with it. And then right now, he's playing in this given key or given register of the keyboard. When he plays a song, he might be higher, he might be lower, he might be somewhere other than this. So you kind of just go with the flow and you react to what they give you to work with.
Great, should we listen to everything together then?
Yeah, let's get the whole band out here.